Morning, afternoon, evening, colleagues. Welcome to the Global Coalition Subworking Group 3.2 February session. I have a few administrative announcements to get us started. First, I want to, as discussed in the last month's session, share the engagement plan for the private sector, the third sector that we are engaging. The coalition will foster a private sector partnership at national, regional, and international levels that will be looking at 6 industries in particular: chemical, shipping, consignment industry, social media, e-commerce, and banking. And in the future, we will also be adding the pharmaceutical and artificial intelligence industries. The plan is the following. During these months of February and March, we are requesting that governments within the coalition establish national dialogues with their private sector companies. The United States has started to do this. For social media, we had on the 9th of February a meeting with top social media companies in the United States, Snap, Meta, and Discord, to form an alliance to prevent drug harms, looking at public health measures that social media companies can take. And INCB will also be hosting a meeting March 5 through 8th in Vienna, which they are calling the Tech Against Trafficking meeting as well. So we're very excited to see all of that development. Now, between February and September, we're also inviting the private sector to share with us their experiences, and we will post content on the website, as well as concrete recommendations from private sector partners. We'll also be inviting those beginning in April. And then the 5th item, at the discretion of co-chairs, we will invite some private sector companies to also engage in some of the subworking group meetings between the April to July timeframe. And finally, we'll also document any achievements from private sector companies from April to July, and we'll also post those achievements on the website. Regarding the recommendations and the meetings coming up in March, this meeting today is the final meeting of the second phase of the coalition, where we are sharing best practices and models. We have received many requests from participants for additional presentations, and we are going to be speaking with the co-chairs next week to determine how best to incorporate all of the requests. If you would like to present or share with us a presentation, please reach out to the email address at the bottom right hand of the screen. Co-chairs have now at this point received a draft list of recommendations for the coalition. These are being shared with all of you via email. And very importantly, on March 6th and 7th, we're looking forward for all of you to participate in a meeting of the working groups, the 3 working groups, where the recommendations will be discussed and finalized and then posted on the website. Therefore, you're encouraged to share the recommendations within your governments in advance of those March 6 and 7 meetings. Importantly, governments are not required to implement all of the recommendations, although we certainly hope that you do. But also, the recommendations are not meant to serve as the exhaustive list of the recommendations. You are all obviously able to also implement additional recommendations that are outside of this list as well. Now, if you're not able to submit your recommendations in time for the March 6 to 7 meeting, you may also continue to post these on the website, and we will collect them and include them in our Year 1 report. So I want to explain a little bit in terms of what all of this means, recommendations, initiatives, and so on. These recommendations that we're agreeing on March 6th and 7th are very broad in terms of their thematic focus. And then coming from that will be specific initiatives that will be projects or actions or policies that can be taken. And from those initiatives, over the next few months, we'll have achievements. We'll have some landmarks that we are now documenting as achievements, but that will not be the outcome. The outcome will come, I believe, in 1, 2, 3 years as we actually start to have an impact in terms of the larger recommendation and what we seek to solve. So how does this actually work in terms of an example? Imagine adopting new innovative drug detection collection techniques as the recommendation. The initiatives might be the adoption of the web app assist screening tool that we heard about a few months ago, or wastewater analysis, for example, collection. So the achievements could be that the online assessment is conducted in 10 countries and that there's a training and mentoring program of 8 countries on wastewater analysis. But the outcomes that would be coming in a year or two would be that, wow, now we can detect new drug use trends, and there are policy decisions that are informed by the data coming out of these tools and this adoption. So that is how we would then support the recommendation. I want to highlight that the initiatives menu is now available on our website for all of you to take a look at. This is not the final initiatives menu. We have about 120 initiatives, and we are regularly updating this. This is the first sort of wave of information, which will be continuously updated. So if you click on that, you will see you can browse by sub-working group, or you can browse by initiative. You can see that when you click on the specific initiative, you will have the description and the background. At the bottom, you'll have any participating countries if it's an existing initiative. But very importantly, as you see highlighted in red, are the email addresses of who you should contact if you are interested in participating in these activities. I will also just raise that expressing interest does not confirm that there are resources. That is a completely different question that we'll have to tackle as a coalition in terms of how do we actually operationalize if there is greater interest than there are resources within international organizations to carry out the work. But we now have the initiatives menu that's available. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And thank you all for your attention. And now I will turn it over to our co-chairs for today, Nicholas Priest and Yuri Kutipe. Thank you both.
Muchas gracias, Brian. Buenos días.
Thank you, Brian. Good day or good afternoon to all of you, all participants. I'm here with my colleague, Nicolas Priest from Indeca, France, and we will be following this session, which is based on continuing the presentation of new initiatives, specifically related to the strengthening and building of recovery networks, as well as the treatment for marginal communities, specifically in transit populations. In other words, those people who are in a situation who require humanitarian aid. To begin, we will have the presentation by Michael Botticelli, the Global Coordinator, on a new initiative of how to build and strengthen these recovery networks locally, nationally, and globally. We have Michael Botticelli, and we want to ask him to begin his presentation. Good morning, Michael.
Hola.
He's muted.
Michael, you need to unmute, please.
Oh, sorry about that. Just as I was saying, I had the pleasure of working with many of you during my time at the White House during the Obama administration. So it's nice to see many familiar faces and friends today, and really privileged by the opportunity to present to you about kind of recovery. And as you think about kind of moving toward recommendations and implementation, hope that gives you the opportunity to think about some possible recommendations as you move forward, as well as to talk about kind of our new initiative in launching the Global Recovery Network. What I thought I would do first of all, and I realize that many people are very fluent in recovery and what it is and the language of recovery, but just do some level setting, because it can mean drastically different things to people, particularly even in the recovery community. So I thought I would start there. So next slide, please. So I think it's important to distinguish between abstinence and recovery. And while abstinence is really the absence of use, alcohol or drug use, and mitigation of symptoms, recovery is different. And recovery really means the return, or sometimes the first time for people, to kind of a purpose-filled and meaningful, and some might even say spiritual life. It's seen as a lifelong process that you're not done. People will say, I am in recovery versus I am recovered. I also should mention, I assume that people know this, I've also been a person in long-term recovery. So I've been in recovery for over 35 years now. My appointment during the Obama administration is a testament to the power of recovery. This is interesting, and it's really been a dialogue that's been happening lately. While most people would agree that recovery includes a commitment to abstinence, there is some disagreement among civil society and among other folks. So I think that's important to acknowledge. Next slide, please. So in 2014, the SAMHSA, which is the federal government agency tasked with the federal coordination of activities, convened a group of stakeholders to try to develop a consensus definition of recovery. And they did this to apply to both substance use disorders and mental health issues. And that's a process of change through which individuals improve their health and wellness, live a self-directed life, and strive to reach their full potential. And particularly for this conversation, it has 4 dimensions: that someone has a healthy as possible life, that they have a home, that they have a safe and stable place to live. They have a purpose in life, whether that's a vocation or educational opportunities, but they have a purpose that gets them up in the morning. And they have a community, and a community that loves them and supports them. So those are particularly important dimensions. Next slide, please. So I think it's also important to acknowledge that recovery is a kind of separate and distinct point on the continuum of care. And while the goal of treatment is really to engage patient to alleviate and to eliminate use and symptoms, recovery supports are generally non-clinical services which help people reach that meaningful life. But I also think it's critical, and particularly for this group, to understand that recovery supports are not just direct services. And I think probably the most, at least from my perspective, the most influential recovery supports can be policies or laws or regulations that facilitate that pathway to recovery. So, for example, many people with a history of addiction have criminal records. Sometimes their involvement with the criminal justice system can mean lifelong prohibitions to returning people. Other examples, providing people with housing or housing supports, job searches, peer support, recovery coaching, and educational supports are all examples of kind of critical recovery support services. Next slide, please. So how do we go about building this community? And this is by no means exhaustive, but I really broke this down into 4 distinct components. The first one, as we were talking about, kind of build consensus and normalize this concept of recovery. It can be very, very new for many, many people. Second, and I think this is very, very critical, build the visibility of people in recovery and develop a recovering community. And I can say for myself, addiction can be a very, very isolating event. Sometimes people in the community don't even know that people are in recovery, and building this visibility and community are important. Just as we think about treatment, it's important to build a recovery community infrastructure to support all the things that we're trying to do. And lastly, reduce the legal, policy, and other barriers to people reaching their full potential. Next slide, please. So how do we normalize this? Just as we did here in the United States, and we actually did with our Global Recovery Network, is convene a group of stakeholders to really promote and develop a consensus definition of recovery. It's really important that we have a baseline understanding in terms of where we are. I think important for this group is continue to promote this concept of recovery, its definitions and services in all the international fora that you belong to, incorporate that in speeches, and use that for a vehicle for promotion. I think it's also important that where it's appropriate, including people in recovery in delegations, presentations, panels, the use of someone's personal story really, I think, moves people and shows the power of recovery. I think many of you know the media can play a very strong role in promoting recovery, the way that people in recovery and people with addiction are portrayed in the media, use of non-stigmatizing language. So that's one area. Second area is build the visibility of people in recovery and develop a recovery community. So really supporting and promoting recovery summits and ongoing activities and events. Here in the United States, September is Recovery Month, and all month long, we have events sponsored by the federal government, local governments, and regional governments. Develop a speakers bureau to ensure that people who are in recovery are telling their story appropriately, and there are tools and resources out there to help people do that. It's also important, as you see in other areas, by engaging high visibility of people who are willing to come out about their recovery, I think really ends the isolation and the shame and stigma that many people have. Developing media campaigns to showcase people in recovery and highlight the barriers, and really promote the inclusion of people with lived experience in all appropriate events and governance structure. So I think it's important that people are part of our boards, they're part of our service structure, and they're part of our conferences and delegations. Next slide, please. So build a recovery community infrastructure. So support or fund local, regional, or national recovery community organizations. This is something that we've been doing for the past few years here in the United States. Promote or directly support recovery support services. And again, these are really important. And as you talked about, as Brian talked about in other areas, engaging kind of the wider community, civic organizations, academic organizations, employers, to really support community level actions are really critical to our success. We need allies in this, and it's critically important that we engage those people in the work that we're doing. Next slide, please. I think perhaps most important for this group, and one that I kind of want to strongly suggest, is the reduce legal policy and other barriers to recovery. When I was at the White House, we established an Office of Recovery as part of our work. And one of the first things that we did is conducted an inventory of all of those laws and policies and regulations that can inhibit people's recovery. And we came up with over 100 of those items. And you know, to really reduce those, we implemented an action plan to reduce or eliminate them. So we tried to do it. So let me give you an example of that. On our federal financial aid form, which gives people financial aid for institutions of for college and institutions of higher learning, there was a checkbox that people had to check if they had a criminal history, and that could also eliminate them. So we worked to eliminate that criteria from federal applications and promote the adoption of non-stigmatizing language. Our words matter, and the words that we choose can really portray that this is a clinical issue as opposed to a criminal justice issue. So I think that, so let me end on a high note. Please, Van, go ahead. So we really are excited about the establishment of this global recovery network. And this is a consortium of international organizations that are coming together to provide a platform for our members to build and reinforce recovery capital, which means kind of people's personal and societal support for recovery. We want to promote lifelong learning, forge and maintain connections to support each other, and really advance the understanding and practice of recovery throughout the world. So we're very, very excited about this network. We have a working group and executive committee and are moving toward our launch at ISIP in June. We are tremendously excited by the work. I want to acknowledge, she's actually helping me with this presentation, Thang Yang, who works for Brian, who's really been my partner in making this happen. So next slide. So what are our goals here? You know, just as we were talking about, we want to create connection and community among people in recovery and organizations that do recovery support. This can often be isolating work, and being able to connect and learn from each other is important. We want to continue to promote an understanding of what recovery is and what it's not, and continue moving toward professionalizing people providing these recovery support services through the universal recovery curriculum and through certification processes. And long-term goals really kind of change policy and promote policies that enhance long-term recovery, continue to establish recovery networks at the national and local level, and ensure people in recovery really reach their full potential for health. That's our ultimate goal here and what we want to establish. So next slide, please. So what can you do? As I said, conducting a policy analysis at the national level that either help or hinder people to sustain recovery, to develop a strategic plan to mitigate those barriers, promote non-stigmatizing language. When I was at the White House, we actually sent out a directive to all of our federal agencies to ask them to use this non-stigmatizing language in all of their public-facing materials. And there's great resources about the kind of word changes that people to make. Engage existing recovery organizations and people in recovery to build a recovery network in your country. So those are, I think, are important potential recommendations that this group can come up with. So next slide, please. And here's, we really want to encourage you and all of your networks and all of your contacts to join our network, to promote research-based messaging, to connect with allies and peers, to learn about events, and to join us in Greece in 2024 for the launch of our event. So I want to thank you for your time and for your attention, and see if people have any questions or comments.
Muchas gracias, Michael. Vamos a dejar las
Thank you
preguntas.
very much, Michael. We will hold questions for the end of the session after presentations, but Michael's presentation was very interesting. He's reminded us about recovery as a process in the lives of people who have substance use disorders, as well as the diverse factors that people face to achieve recovery, and also the resources that are necessary to be able to take on this task. And the very recovery network is one of the most valuable resources in this effort. And so we'll now look at the support web for harm reduction and support provision for marginalized and low-income communities. Jimena Kalawski will present that. She is here from CICAD, as well as Father Carlos Olivero from the Caribbean Episcopal Council. They'll be discussing prevention in Latin America. Father Olivero works within the Episcopal Council for Latin America. And so you have the floor, Father and Jimena.
Muy buenos días, muy buenos días, muy buenas
Good
tardes.
morning, good afternoon, wherever you may find yourselves. Thank you very much for inviting us to present on this program. My name is Jimena Kalawski. I am the chief of the Demand Reduction Unit at CICAD within OAS. What we'd like to share with you today is the work that we have carried out toward the curriculum in drug prevention, treatment, and recovery for faith-based organizations in Latin America and the Caribbean. It's something that we have realized over the years is that faith-based organizations are oftentimes the first line of defense. They are present in almost all of these countries, and oftentimes they are present where there are no other organizations, whether they be from the government or the health system. And so it's because of that that we have decided to adopt this strategic approach of working with faith-based organizations to give them the ability to understand more about drug use through training that we provide. And what the primary components of interventions would be, what is evidence-based. And so we've been able to work with the Catholic Church to develop this first curriculum. And through that curriculum, we have created a course that looks at three different areas where we address the church's conception of human beings and their different dimensions. And we offer readily available tools that offer basic knowledge on evidence-based prevention, treatment, and how these can be implemented in schools through individual counseling at the church level, etc. And so that's how this curriculum was created, which was made jointly with the Catholic Church and also with experts, drawing from the UPC and the UTC. And we have already worked on a pilot version that has been launched in different countries and has been well received. And so I will now give the floor to Father Charlie to talk about the implementation and the development of this first pilot and talk about how this curriculum has been adapted to an online format, and then also talk about our work with the Catholic Church. Thank you, Jimena. My name is Father Charlie. I'm from Buenos Aires. And I would like to underline the point that Jimena made, which is that churches are an important source of guidance for people who are struggling with substance abuse. And so it's for this reason that the objectives of this course are first for Catholic communities to acquire the basic knowledge to properly receive people who may seek out help and to be able to respond appropriately to these people. We would also like to, within the church, spread prevention as a response. We launched our first pilot of this curriculum, and this generated a lot of enthusiasm within the community. The people who participated in it were very enthusiastic. And so there was a group created within the Archdiocese of Asunción for prevention. And so there are bi-weekly meetings among people who are struggling the most in this situation, and the church is attempting to respond. In September, we were in Chile and we had a second in-person pilot. In Chile, historically, PANAL as an organization had operated. This was reborn, you could say, this organization. And they had different sorts of ideological frameworks, and this gave a new guidance to these people in the church who were offering this treatment. There was a church in Santiago that we will now be working with in March. In June, there was a cooperation agreement signed between CICAD and the Latin American Episcopal Council, which brings together all Episcopal councils through Latin America and the Caribbean. And it was agreed that this course would be offered, this curriculum would be offered online. In August and November, we were working on converting this to an online format. And then in November and the beginning of December, this curriculum was delivered through Civic, which is CELAM's training arm. This was specifically targeted toward pastoral agents, and we're very happy with what we're seeing. And very happy because we understand that this is an opportunity for the church to join these efforts. And it's also great for CICAD to find an ally that has the sort of reach that the Catholic Church has. Thank you very much. Thank you, Father Charlie. I'm sorry for having translated his name. And so this experience in creating support networks is also very interesting, and including faith-based or religious organizations, as we know in the Latin American context and in other parts of the world, they are the first line of defense for vulnerable communities, such that they have some working capital, so to speak, but they are helping people is also a part of their mission, such that they can help people in recovery for people suffering from substance abuse. And coming up next, we have a presentation from Giovanna Campello, who's the head of PTRS, who will be also sharing a new initiative about addressing substance use in humanitarian settings. Giovanna, you have the floor.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Thank you for giving me the possibility to tell you a little bit about what the UNODC Prevention, Treatment, and Rehabilitation section does in addressing substance use disorder in humanitarian settings. Let me share quickly my slides with you. In terms of data, I don't want to dwell too long, just to remind us that there are many people who are forcibly displaced worldwide, but that people in need of humanitarian assistance is a much broader group than this. In fact, 1 in every 23 people globally needs humanitarian assistance, and this is where we are starting to work. We are following and adapted models of the protective and risk factors that make people vulnerable to starting to use substances and developing substance use disorder. And we have adapted it to the phases of displacement and where different factors can influence substance use disorder. And therefore, different factors need to be addressed. In terms of substance use patterns among displaced populations, I would just like to note that patterns of substance use vary very widely, and there is relatively limited information that you can see on the slide. But what I would like to let you know is about the handbook that we are developing to document best practice and evidence-based and evidence-informed practice in addressing substance use and substance use disorder in humanitarian settings. For prevention, we are basing ourselves on our long experience in delivering family multi-level parenting and caregiver support for families living through challenging contexts. We have developed a tiered system that moves from very basic leaflets to trauma-informed interventions. And we have documented the effectiveness of this package in increasing the resilience of children and parents and families in numerous scientific articles that you can see on the slide. On treatment, we are basing ourselves on the standards for the treatment of drug use disorder that we have developed with the World Health Organization, but also on the guidelines on mental health care standards in emergency. And in general, it's always important to distinguish between the acute phase of displacement and the protracted phase. In the acute phase, it is important to focus on life-saving and basic psychosocial support, especially thinking about screening and brief intervention, withdrawal management, continuation of medication, and the reduction of negative health and social consequences like take-home naloxone, and very basic psychosocial support. As the emergency is protracted, it's important to think about a continuum of adapted services and including people with substance use disorder in other support available, and as an essential component of general health social services for displaced populations, and not just as an afterthought. And together with our colleagues at UNHCR, WHO, and the members of the Interagency Standing Committees on Humanitarian Affairs, we are developed training materials for community health workers in humanitarian setting, precisely to make these guidelines a reality. I close here in the interest of time, and I remain at your disposal by email or on Twitter or in person during the meeting to respond to any questions you might have.
Muchas gracias, Giovanna, y en especial también, no solo por recordarnos.
Thank you very much, Giovanna, and especially for reminding us of the important task of ensuring a continuum of care for migrant populations. But I also appreciate that you spoke briefly to now leave space for Carolina Gorlero from ISUP in Argentina, who will be sharing also via recording Argentina's experience in helping migrant and refugee populations, specifically with respect to psychosocial support and mental health. And so we would appreciate if the video could begin now.
Good morning, good afternoon. I am Carolina Gorlero, and today, on behalf of Argentina, ISUP, I'm going to talk about mental health, psychological support in providing care to migrant and refugee population, and to share the Argentine experience. As you can see, as our census in 2022 shows that we have more than 46 million inhabitants. Out of this, around 2 million, meaning 4.2% of the whole population, were born in another country. And as you can see, they come from other countries, from Latin America, Paraguay, Bolivia, Venezuela, Peru, or Chile. Argentina has two very advanced laws that guarantee access to health, and they are the National Law of Migration, 25A71, and the General Law to Acknowledge and Protect Refugees, 26.165. They guarantee access to health and cannot be denied. It doesn't matter where people come from or their residential status. And the health care providers have to inform these people what the rights are and the laws that protect them. Even though we have these very advanced laws, people still think or have myth about migration. They think that the migrants abuse the health system. Here you can see lemon that shows this idea that are barriers to access to healthcare system. So here I want to share with you which are the publications that we have in our country to improve mental health system and to protect the refugees. Here we have the here you have the link of each one of the publications. We also have the WHO organization that protect vulnerable populations, and 2 publications, which is the Manual for Mental Health and Psychological Support. I was one of the writers, and the other one is the Guide to Protect Human Rights. I'm going to share with you now that based on these instruments, we set up a strategy to offer workshops for mental health workers, not only at the federal level, but at local level. We have a very large country, and therefore, you can see here, we were able to offer different workshops. This shows what we did in 2023, and we were able to train 465 people in 11 provinces. Here you can see the purposes and the objectives of this: to reflect on cultural diversity, encounter and disencounters, to address the risk factors and to protect the mental health, to warn, and this is very important, which are the risks of thinking of migrants and refugees as criminals, to work on the construction of representations, stereotypes and prejudice, and also to protect the migrants, to offer tools like psychological assistance, and to also build up spaces to exchange good practices of what worked and what didn't work, and to set up networks. If you would like more information, please contact me here. Thank you so much for your time and attention. Well, thank you, Carolina Gorlero, for your presentation. I think that she is part of this conversation today. And so we have only 15 minutes left. So let's go to questions and answers and the debate on these issues. So, Nicolas, please, I'm going to give you the floor.
Hello to everyone. Thank you
morning.
also to those who are interpreting in all these languages so that we are able to speak together at the same time. Thank you very much to the presenters and for the presentations. There were 4 presentations. There were 5 total, but there were 4 presentations. If I summarize the idea of these presentations, the approach we're talking about is humanistic, regarding the use of drugs with systems, trainings, guides, reference systems that give a chance to those who are already experiencing so much difficulty in their lives. For people to be able to be welcomed effectively. And I think that this is not incompatible with the desire to fight against the use of drugs in general, to work on as good a welcome as possible for these populations. So thank you very much for all this complementary information. You have the possibility of raising your hand so that we can look at the comments and questions, hear your comments and questions.